Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is September the 15th, 2025, and this is a regular meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. Actually, our second meeting of the year. The first meeting was last Monday night, which was unusual, and that, was, of course, was because of Labor Day. So I think that was the only time during the whole year that we'll have meetings on consecutive Monday nights. So hopefully you had a chance to watch or to see Rick Salmon in action last night. If you were unable to attend the actual meeting, I highly recommend that you watch the recording if you have not already done so. The recording is on the West Shore Photography Club's YouTube channel, so it will be available, indefinitely. So that should not be a problem for you. Okay, we're going to have an image review tonight. There are 12 images that Bryson Leidich is going to review. But before we get to Bryson, just a couple of things. Our next online meeting will be on Monday, October the 6th. Monday, October the 6th. We're going to start with a before and after session. Now, we've done these before, and it's going to be up to you and your fellow club members to send me a picture that you want to talk about, and you're going to show the before and after versions. So you can edit it in any way you want, and then you'll have a few minutes to talk about why you took the image and how you got it to look that magnificent way that it looks as a final image. Okay, so that'll be before and after. So as I explained last meeting, we have a philosophy this year, and we've divided up to the meetings, the online meetings. There are 18 of them, and there'll be 6 image reviews, like tonight. There will be 6 formal educational type presentations, like we had from Rick Salmon, and we already have a couple other outside speakers lined up. And then there'll be 6 meetings that will be member involvement. So before and after is one aspect of that, but we're also going to have the type of we had last year that was very popular, Mark Albano ran, that was tell us anything about the image. So you can, present any image and just tell a story behind it. And Mark has some other ideas, including Mike Donovan coming up with one later in the year. It refers to outtakes. Show us your not so best stuff. So knowing Mike, I'm sure that will be interesting. Okay, we've had a bunch of trips and we have more coming up in the near future. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jean for the trips.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Yes, as Dennis said, our September has been packed full of trips. Last week we had 3. We went to Carlisle and Dickinson, went to the zoo, and went to Art of State. So they were all attended by members, and hoping everybody put some of their images on our Smug Mug site. We still have more trips this month. Can you believe it? Let's see, on the 27th, we have a workshop. Dennis, Joe, Mark, and Elaine will have various vignettes to show and explain. And on the 28th, we're going to Suzanne H. Arnold Art Gallery, and that's going to be a teachable type meet and greet, not necessarily taking photographs. So we have those 2 things coming up. And this Friday, Steve and Don have images at the Pine Street Presbyterian Church in Harrisburg, and their exhibit will be part of Third on the Berg. So if you're out and about, check that out. In October, we're going to go to the Pumpkin Fest down at Old Bedford Village. We do have other trips planned, but we don't have anything pinned down yet. So stay tuned for that. Dennis?
Okay, thanks, Jean. Yeah, as most all of you know, Messiah University is a beautiful campus right along the banks of the Yellow Breeches. So on Saturday, the 27th, I think starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, as Jean said, Joe, Elaine, Mark, and I are going to be there to lead groups. So whoever shows up, we're going to break up into small groups and we're going to walk around, look for photographs, and then capture some, photographs and using some techniques that are possibly new to you, and you'll have a chance to practice under our supervision. So that should be very interesting. Okay, reminder about dues. Uh, we unfortunately don't have that option where you can put your credit card in and we automatically take your dues every year. That would be convenient for me and some of us. But what that means is then I have to ask you to renew your dues every year, and many of you have already done that. There are two ways to do it. One, the easiest way, go to the website, not the SmugMug website, the traditional one, okay? And at the top, there's a join renew button. You hit that and you can pay with PayPal, even if you don't have a PayPal account. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Many people are doing that. It's easy to do, quick and easy. If you don't want to do PayPal for whatever reason, then you can simply send a check to our treasurer, okay, Rich Hudson. And I'll put that information in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow with a link to the recording of this meeting. Okay, without further ado, let me turn the meeting over to Bryson, who's going to review the 12 member images. Bryson, it's all yours.
Good evening. I hope you can see. Am I sharing properly?
We can see the intro slide.
Good. Okay. Hi, I've been here before. I think you might remember that. One of the things I'm going to do tonight is not only review, but use each image or some of the images as little ways to spin off onto a conversation about how to shoot or how to edit or whatever comes up. Since I can't access your metadata and I am looking at small JPEGs, there are some assumptions I have to make about certain things like resolution and sharpness and things. So I just assume up front that you did everything absolutely wonderfully, and we'll go from there. So let's get started, as they say. First one, Osprey strikes gold. I imagine the goldfish wasn't real fond of the situation here, but it's a good action capture. If this was cropped, then I would suggest that the maker allow a little bit more room on the left-hand side of the image so that the bird has room to fly. The bird is sort of centered and the eye of the bird is a little left of center, and you want, whenever you have an action, you want a place for it to come from and to go to. So my impression is that we need a little bit more room on the left for the bird to fly into. And of course, if it's if you don't have that option, if this is just the way it came out of the camera, I understand that. But if you crop to get this, then I suggest the crop could be a little wider. The images are really good use of high shutter speed for capture and also wide aperture. So you've got very limited depth of field. So apparently you're using a camera that's pretty good at tracking, and that worked out really well for you. That is a very good setup for both wildlife and for sports photography, to shoot with a wide aperture. Sometimes with a lot of lenses, you can do that wide open, especially telephoto lenses that are optimized to be used that way. And so that works out pretty well. I think in color composition, the overall processing doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. So we're pretty good there. Do we want to get comments from each of the makers after each one?
Yes, please. And I have a question before we get to the maker of this photograph.
Absolutely.
Regarding the space to the left, how do you feel about going into Photoshop and using generative fill?
If that gets you there, I've got no problem with it. I've used it, I've played with it a little bit, and it sometimes works extraordinarily well. And if that gets you where you need to be, why, I treat photography like painters. They don't start with anything. They just sort of put in what they want to have in there. And so I look at an image, more worried about, hold on a second, let me. All right, a little better. The end product is what really counts, right? So if when you're done, you've got an image that people can visually buy, they don't see any weirdness going on that was caused by your use of the software, fine. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Okay, Curtis, comments on your picture?
Yeah, I do have this was cropped down, so I did clip the side of that wing off there on the left. So I have plenty. Matter of fact, I have a lot more. Um, I had it with it not cropped down as like this, and it just didn't have any wow factor to it. So I needed to get in a little closer, I thought. So that's what I did. I went in to get a little bit more of the fish and the eyes of the osprey there to give me a little more impact, I thought. But yeah, I agree. You do need some room to the left for them to fly too. How's that?
right. I don't think you need a lot. And you could go with a panoramic aspect ratio on this. You could make it a little bit skinnier top to bottom. If that made you feel better about the way it fills the space, that would be another way to manage that. But it's good capture.
Good. Yep. Thank you very much.
Kurt, you happen to know the shutter speed? I'm curious.
This was a little slower than I normally shoot at. I think this was around 1600. I was actually at Kiwanis Lake.
Mhm.
I was set up to take photographs of the egrets up in the tree in the nest, which I didn't need a high shutter speed for that. And this osprey just kept circling and circling, and finally it came down and hit the water, and I was able to capture it. So normally I like to be up around 3200.
Okay. I'm impressed with the pan blur in the background. That's really cool.
Yeah.
You're moving with the bird and the fish, and that background just gives you a real nice streak to the look.
Yep.
Yeah, very nice.
Very good. All right.
All right, let's move on to number 2 here. River Dusk. This is good framing using foreground interest. If you, I would imagine that the maker of this is probably aware of the images I'm about to mention, but I suggest you take a look at Ansel Adams' photo of Mount Williamson with all the rocks in the foreground. Or if you're familiar with John Sexton's work, he has a book with a photo of the Pfeiffer Beach in California. And they're both examples of this kind of perspective where you're using the foreground as you got essentially a more detailed foreground and then off onto the distance. So you have a very strong foreground to background relationship. And that's a very good way to make an image. In the old days, we had a thing we called Scheimpflug, which if you shot with a view camera, you could tilt the lens in the front and create essentially depth of field that went from right in front of the camera all the way to infinity. And that's the way we did it in the old days. But nowadays, we can't bend the camera that way, at least more than once. And so we have to resort to other things. There's a thing called image stacking, which you can use where you focus on 2 or 3 or 4 different spots in the image, and then the software marries them together so you get foreground and background in focus. Now, I recommend that you study And I'm going to mention a website here that I'm very fond of called CambridgeInColor.com, and that's color with a U. It's a British or German, I'm not sure which website, but they have tools and tutorials that are very, very good. And they will help you. One of the things I like is that they have depth of field and diffraction tools that you can use to determine the amount of depth of field you're going to have based on the camera body you've got and the lens and the distance you are from the subject and the aperture and all that stuff. And it's a very good way to learn how to use depth of field to your advantage. And because, you know, maybe you don't know, if you don't know, when you get far away, your depth of field can be extreme at very wide apertures. And when you get close, on the other hand, you end up, oops, I lost it. You end up with a shallower depth of field. So if you have a better understanding of how you can utilize depth of field you can make a better decision on where to aim, foreground, midground, middle, back, etc., and how many images you may need. You may only need 3 in most circumstances, I find, to get a decent image, but sometimes if you're really pushing your limits on a foreground image, you can end up needing 4 or 5 to get that done. I like the way the shadows and highlights are managed here. It's very well processed. The only thing I look really sure about is the horizon line. It's just tilted very slightly clockwise. You want to make sure that you are working either with a level camera, or even that doesn't work all the time. You want to make sure you level it when you get into Lightroom or Photoshop.
Okay, George, comments?
No, I shot that last week actually at the mouth of Chickies Creek along the Susquehanna. I think it's a 9-image HDR. And it's shot at 14 millimeters, so I don't worry too much about depth of field. And when you put it at f8 or f11, it doesn't matter where you focus. At 14 millimeter, it's all in focus.
Well, that brings up another thing too, and that's one of the things you want to check out on that website is how much depth of field you need based on the lens and the aperture. And you may find that you get enough depth of field with that wide a lens at something as even f5.6 could give you from 1.5 feet or 3 feet in front of the image all the way to infinity. The one thing you want to be careful of is a lot of people say, well, I want depth of field, so they go f16, f22. Bad idea. There's a thing called diffraction, and diffraction actually causes softness in the image because it spills image information from one pixel to another and has a tendency to degrade the image. So you do not want to close down any further than you have to in order to get the depth of field that you need for any given shot. I spent 10 days out west, and I think maybe I used f11 on a full frame camera half a dozen times for interiors, and all of the rest of the images were made at f8 or f9. It's just not necessary to get into extreme apertures like 16 and 22 for most photos that we make. So now you know. Okay, let's go through number 3. Okay, somebody is learning to be a tabletop product photographer. I think I can figure that one out. This is pretty nicely done. This is something that most amateurs don't do, and that's light their own pictures. This is something I did for a living, so this is something I understand pretty well. This is well done. It's nicely centered. The lighting is good. Notice the 2 highlights here from the left and right lights that were on either side of the image. And now the size of those lights in terms of the width and the proximity, how close they are to the subject, will dictate how sharp or wide these lines would be. If the light sources get closer to the subject, they're going to get wider. If they get bigger, they're going to get wider. And then you end up with a bigger piece of light on either side. This is nicely done. The neutrals are are handled very well. So color wise, I have no problem with this at all. This does give me an opportunity to talk about color saturation. And interestingly, if you examine this, you say, oh, well, the reds are saturated, well, these reds back in this area are only saturated to middle 60 percentages. The saturation, the really deep saturation, is actually down here in the darker areas, which is not what you would normally think based on your casual observation as a photographer. But one of the things you want to be careful with, especially reds, is they tend to, if you oversaturate any color actually, but reds in particular, have a tendency to rob detail. In other words, if you get so much color that it actually starts to degrade the resolution and you see less information in the black and white of the image, where the color takes over, if you will. That's not the case here. This is very well done, but that was just a way to jump off onto that conversation. So done.
Very good. Yeah, this is Tammy's first entry into image reviews. So Tammy, tell us about this image. You'll have to unmute yourself. I know she's online. Yep. Tammy, you there?
There. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay. Yeah. This was one of my final projects that I did. I was a student at Hack in studio, and I decided to do glass because it was a hard thing to do and I wanted to challenge myself. And I was overall excited about this one that turned out really well. So, but I am interested in like product photography as well. So
it can be a lot of fun. It can be very creative. At the same time, I would say it can also be challenging.
I'll tell you, it was very frustrating.
Well, you did good, so something must have worked out for you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And that was done on my Rebel T7.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive. Well, there's another little point of departure too. You don't need the latest and greatest in order to make good pictures, right?
Right.
Any camera that is capable is good enough. You don't need, if the camera doesn't fail you, it's good enough. That's the best way to put that, I guess. So.
And I want to say, like, I used the lighting on the side, and then I used the one at the bottom, and I probably put 3 or 4 gels of red over top of it to get the redder color. And then I had a snoot in the front because you couldn't read the Josh sign of the label. And there was a little circle there in the front because you could see the little circle. So that's what I did Photoshop out then. That was like the only problem that I had was getting my reflection in the bottle in the front.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
Very good. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, after the fire. Very slight evidence of some pin cushioning, just lens distortion here. And if you're processing in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, either one, there's a lens corrections tab. And there's two check boxes there, and you want to check them both and then just make that the default. And what that happens to do is it enables a thing called profile correction. Profile correction is Adobe analyzes different lenses and discovers when they have things like pin cushion or barrel distortion. That's where the straight lines in an image tend to bow out or bow in this case, bowing in, which is called pin cushion distortion. And it corrects for that. And it does it automatically, so you don't have to worry about it, because if you had to fuss with it, it would be a pain in the neck, a big pain. So that's an easy one. You check the box and the software does the work for you. So do that.
Yeah, Bryson, can you explain what you're seeing for the folks who may not understand what that is? What are you seeing?
You have a vertical line here. You see how this tends to bow in. It's very subtle, but it's there. In other words, it's wider gap here than there is at the top and at the bottom. It just tends to, that's why they call it pin cushion. If you think about a pin cushion, if you're old enough, they have a tendency to stick out on the edges and then they bow inward. And that's what we call pin cushion distortion. Barrel would be the opposite of that. And of course, you know what a barrel looks like. And that's where the outside edges, instead of being parallel, they bow outward. This is the opposite of that. So
thank you.
Now I would suggest that I would not have cropped this like this. I would have kept that circle at the top. You want to finish the thought, if you will. So if you crop this, I would uncrop it and get that in. What you have to do is you have to train yourself to see the picture in the camera before you press the button. And that can take a while because most people have a tendency to see pictures right in here. And then they don't spend too much time wandering around the edges, which is exactly what you have to do. You have to wander around the edges of the picture to see what you may have missed in terms of your composition. And so I would add that if you cropped it out, I would put it back in. Now, the other thing is, when you're looking at an image like this, the eye has a tendency to go to the sharpest part of the picture, the brightest part of the picture, and the most contrasty part of the picture. So it's very easy for the eye to go right in here because the contrast is good here. And apparently the sharpness is fine. But when you're looking at this image in its entirety, it's pretty much the same all over. And my recommendation would be to select the center area of importance and then invert the selection so that the bricks and this foreground area are selected, and darken it. And darken it not dramatically, but noticeably. And I think as soon as you do that, you will see a big change in your impression of the image, because your eye will be instantly drawn toward this center interest, and it would make the image have a lot more power and impact. So play with that. It's worth the effort. And I think you will find it will help you think better about how you process images in the future.
Sorry, had myself muted. Mary Eileen, would you talk about your image, please?
Yes, sir. This is the back end of the Broad Street Market, the brick building that had the fire. And I was driving down 6th Street, which is behind the building, and noticed that they had taken the wood off of this whole doorway archway that had been covered. So went home and got my camera and came back. And it was a little difficult because I had to squeeze the lens in between the pieces of the chain link fence that was surrounding the whole building. And so I'm not sure if I have cropped it at the top, that I cut off some of that arch. I'll have to look at it. I can maybe try to extend that or something. But I was just so surprised that I could see straight through there. And not only that, at the top, because the roof was burned off, that building is the Midtown Scholar, the top of the Midtown Scholar building. And so I just kind of like the whole view, but I appreciate Bryson's comments. Bryson, about particularly about darkening the surrounding brick, to better highlight the center of it. And we'll look into that pin cushioning thing also. Thank you.
Sure enough. Yeah, I think if you darken that, you will, I almost guarantee you an oh wow as soon as you do it.
All right.
Let's put it that
Thank you. Thank you.
way. Sunset at the Millersburg Ferry. This is nice. It's got a good feeling to it. It's a good choice of subject matter. It's interesting. I wish the camera were higher. Now, I understand that that's not always possible. I mean, you're standing there and the camera's in front of your face, etc. But my point is that if the camera were higher, the top of the boat could get into the river instead of the background, and you would get a separation, and that would make the subject matter better defined. It doesn't, there's no problem, of course, with the bottom, because we're used to seeing things sitting on the ground or in the water or whatever they happen to be doing. But I think if the camera were higher and you had a separation there with the water in the background, it would make a lot more sense than these bushes, which appear in the background and then appear almost to be sitting on top of the boat, which is not great. So a nice black and white conversion. I'm curious as to whether or not the maker vignetted or drew a darkening to the left side, or if that's natural, because it almost appears to me that it goes down into the background. So I'm curious about that. If you did that intentionally, I think I'd back off on that about 50%. So.
Okay, Dick.
Thank you very much, Bryson. Dick Messner here. Millersburg is about 15-20 minute run from my house. I keep watching the sky, hoping to catch a good sunset. I've shot many from over there, but the night I was over, it just did not work out right. I didn't like what I was getting in color. So I decided to convert one to black and white and see what happened. But I appreciate your comment. If I would have been another 2 feet higher, it would have been a much better photograph. And I had room to get higher. So totally photographer's error. And yes, I did do a little bit of vignetting on the left-hand side of the sky, just to sort of say it was nighttime coming on.
I'm good at myself.
Thanks, Dick.
Very good. You got a great subject there. I think that's worth playing with. So keep going back. If it's that close, why not? That's good.
There's also a park over there that shooting through the trees of the park, the sunset looks fantastic.
Oh, there you
Just
go.
have not gotten the clouds the way I want them yet.
Well, unfortunately, you can't make the clouds do what you want. You can change the sky, if you will, but you know, that depends on how hard you want to work. Okay, good. Number 6, threads. One of the problems with product photography is lighting and managing it and visualizing it. And I think if you pay attention to what's going on here, you find that some of the tonal values where the vignette darkens the image are better than the ones that are in the center of the image. So my suggestion here would be that you want to process this image for a better overall look before you get involved in the vignette. And I think the vignette is too obvious. One of the ways, if you're doing this in the raw instead of later in Photoshop, if you're doing this with the vignette options you have in your initial processing, I suggest that you really, really darken that vignette, make it extremely obvious, and then play with the centering so that the shape, and play with the softening of the edges until you get something that appears to be a little bit more subtle, and then back that density, that darkness off a lot until it just becomes something that you feel more than you see, because a vignette doesn't have to be very severe in order to have a good impact. So I think you just whoever did this, the vignette's a little strong. And if you would crop this and just simply look at this center section alone, I think you would see that it's too bright. It's just brighter than it needs to be. And the combination of the dark edge from the vignette and then the brightness in here keeps it from being as strong an image as it could be. I have a tendency to process for the highlights. I want to get my brighter areas down to where I want them to be before I start fooling around with the shadows. That's me. How you work may be different, but that's just a suggestion. So done.
Very good. Okay, David?
Hey, Bryson, Dave Marchetto. Thanks very much for that. This is an iPhone photo, and I'm taking Dennis' course on iPhone photography. And so this is my first try at a macro. And it was pretty quickly done compared to the usual setup. And maybe that kind of accounts for some of the comments that you made and that I can see for sure. Bryson, this is a small point, but if you look at the bobbin, the red lettering on that, I just have a question for you. It looks a bit studied to me. Suppose I rotated that one way or the other, say a quarter turn. Would that do anything for you? Would that be a better capture in your mind, or is it sort of like the 12 o'clock version the way to go on this?
You mean rotating the entire image?
No, just the bobbin.
Oh, star bobbin?
This.
Yeah, with the red lettering.
Oh,
All I'm saying is, if it's a steering wheel, if you just turned it, say a quarter turn, the bobbin itself, would that be a better capture than the way it is now, sort of straight and center?
I would, yes, I would think so. I always like to make things not be so regimented, if you will, in that regard, because the more obscure, or the more, that's not the right word. I think if you rotated that one way or the other, I'm looking at it and thinking I would rotate this counterclockwise to the left, all right, so that this would rotate, that way, and sit like this instead of like this. Yeah, I agree. Do that.
Yeah. Thanks very much for that perspective. The Clark's lettering on the left was pretty purposeful. And I was kind of thinking of, doing the same thing, just loosening it up a little bit. And I was just curious as to your thought on that.
Yeah, if you had, well, this has a little bit of an angle to it. Why does that do that? I don't know. My mouse. If this were rotated a little bit clockwise and then this a little bit counterclockwise, then they would have this tension, if you will, between the two of them. And I think, yes, that would be a good thing.
I really appreciate your comments. All things considered, Bryson. Thanks again.
Absolutely. All righty, let's go here. Similar issues here in terms of overall values, and that is, I'm saying that certain parts of this image look to me like they're brighter than they should be. And one of the problems that we have is we tend to look at the entire image and not at individual portions of the image. We don't want to get in and start fussing with selections and modifications. We just want the whole thing to come together at one shot. And you can't always do that. I think this image would be a lot nicer if it had more of a nighttime feel to it, which is, but you got the lights on here and everything. So if this brighter area here were darker, this stuff would go down along with it and give more of a mood to it, which I think would enhance the image. You could always brighten it back up if you needed to. In other words, if you wanted to preserve some detail in here, that could be done very easily with some masking or dodging, however you want to do it. But I would, I would darken this image a bit. I found it interesting that this, which is a light, is as bright as you would expect it to be, 100%. This, which is also a light, is not as bright as this is. Now, it's strange. You would think that being another light source, it should be more or less equal. That's interesting, but not a big critical thing. The thing that's more interesting is this, I'm some kind of a sign, I'm guessing, is brighter than this is. Now you're saying,
We're having trouble seeing your cursor. I can't really see your cursor. Maybe you could explain which
Okay.
sign.
Can you see the cursor now?
I can, yes.
Okay, this sign or whatever it is if I took this into Photoshop, I do strange things. This is actually brighter than the lamp. If you select highlights and start to bring things down, this shows up first, this shows up second, and then this shows up third. So this is actually getting some light reflected off, I'm assuming, from this, which is making it brighter than it would normally be. These are things you really have to keep your eyes out for when you're shooting, and it's tough to train yourself to look at the fine details like that. But the more you can not only look at the overall composition, but start to take it apart piece by piece. It's one of the things that one of my mentors told me. He said, don't look at the whole picture, look at the individual component parts of the picture and decide how you want each one of them to look in the final image. And then either control it or modify it or be prepared to do so later in the process with digital. Possibly a second exposure where you could marry the two and bring down the brightness of the sign and make it look a little bit more realistic, because it shouldn't light up on its own. That would be my big determining thing there. So it's difficult to assess the overall sharpness in this and some of the other images. It looks fairly sharp to me, but of course, whenever you're making an image small enough to work like this in this circumstance, it sometimes has a tendency to rob critical sharpness. When I do personal one-on-one analysis, we always deal with the original capture at full resolution and with access to the metadata, so I can tell the shutter speed and the aperture and all that, the focusing distance, what was focused on, and how you may have been able to manage the image just a little differently in order to control some of those things. But you've got highlight, reflected light on this sign and on the front of this, whatever you call that thing. that are a little bit brighter than I think they need to be in order to manage the mood. Okay, mood, that's the word I want to go for.
Okay, Rich, it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I shot this. This is a great example of being an amateur on certain aspects like the light. I wrestled with all those light points and realized I got to a point where I did not quite know what I was doing. I agree with and I ended up taking the big lamp and making that a little bit lighter. I also wrestled with the darkness of it. I agree with you. I wanted to make it more of a night scene because it certainly was. But I was afraid of losing some of the details. I probably should have masked a little bit on the right, a little bit, more than that. So that's ended up because I was trying to balance things out with a light. That's why you got your comments are right on in that respect, whatever. So yeah, and I think the clarity on it ended to be good if I blow it up a little bit, whatever. But I took this to Ragusa, Sicily, and it was such a surreal sight, whatever. And when I looked around, it was handheld. When I looked around as I was setting it up, took 2 or 3 pictures, I realized the people who were with me had already left me in the dark. So I thought maybe it was getting a little shaky, but I think it came all right. But just one quick question for you, Bryson.
Yeah.
The other thing I wrestled with, and I had a friend who's been a professional photographer, and he didn't come up with a resolution on this, is that if you were to is this the correct straightening points on it? I tried to straighten everything with the lamp, but then I kept moving around to it. Does it look like it has the right straightness to it, if that's the right word?
Yeah, well, you look at your verticals, all the way across the image, and nothing jumped out at me and said, "Uh-oh, it's crooked." So you did a good job. One of the things that I always try to do whenever I have to tilt the camera up or down, and you get the perspective that's imposed by the camera on the subject. In other words, if you tilt up, it's going to tilt in at the top, and if you tilt down, it's going to tilt in at the bottom. Whenever you do that, try to make sure that whatever is in the center is as vertical as it can possibly be. Okay? Not so the camera isn't rotated slightly to the right or to the left. Whatever that center line is, make that as vertical as it could possibly be. And the reason for that is when you start to change the sides in order to do your correction for your perspective, they will both come in at the same time in the same manner and the same percentage. If you have that thing tilted and you start to bring one side in, you'll find the other side isn't quite what it should be, and that'll drive you nuts. That'll absolutely drive you crazy, because the first thing you need to do is make sure that that center line is vertical. And then when you do your perspective corrections, the sides will come in automatically and you'll be good to go. I agree with your assessment that it should be a moody nighttime image, and I think it needs to be a little darker in order to get there. But it's a great picture. Yeah.
Thanks, Bryson, for your critique. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Go for it. Nice.
May I ask a question on this photo, please? What would happen if you shot a 5-shot HDR of the same image? Would that help with your brightness and darkness, your shadows, in working with?
Very likely it would. I don't necessarily think I'd say 5 shots, but that's circumstantial. I have a friend who shoots a lot of pictures, and I swear he does a 3-shot bracket on every picture he takes. He has his camera set to automatically, when he presses the button, bam, 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 he gets 3 exposures instantly. And that gives him the opportunity to, pick the one where the lights are the best, the one where the shadows are the best. If you can do that and do an HDR and get a good result, I do that. I almost hesitate to say it. I do that, but I do it manually. I don't use HDR software. I do that by making selections and then compositing the images on top of each other. That sounds complicated. It's not as hard as you might think. But I think your idea that the concept of a bunch of bracketed images that give you some options is not a bad idea at all. Does that get you
Thank
where
you.
you? Great.
Bryson, does he usually use a two-stop difference between the three images?
There again, it depends on the subject. It depends on how great the difference is between the brightest and the darkest parts of the subject. So it's always a judgment call. And I mean, sometimes a stop will do it. Sometimes two stops is necessary. And I guess there's probably there's no do it this way answer to that. Let's put it that way. There's too many things that could be different here. You're thinking how bright this is, and then look at how much less light there is back here in the shadows. You know what? You almost you have to take a couple of readings and make decisions based on what's going to get you where you need to be.
You know, you're starting to sound like Rick Salmon last week. His famous comment is, "It depends."
That's exactly right.
That's his answer to everything.
I will buy that 100%. Absolutely. Now, I like this. This is a good capture. The reason it's a good capture is it's not just a picture of a kid. This tells a story. It's not a snapshot. And that makes it a good photograph. It really doesn't matter whose kid it is. It's a good photograph. That's all that matters, right? Done. Now, I like the composition. I like the placement of the subject. Everything is fine. There's an overall red cast to this image. I think it's almost pretty obvious, but if you do take it and analyze it, you'll discover that the reds go all the way down here into the shadows, and they are sucking blue out of the water. If you get rid of the red cast, you'll find that there's a lot of blue in this water that comes racing up at you, and the skin tones get better, and the overall picture looks much more natural. There are ways to do this in Photoshop that involve blurring the image to get a color and then dealing with blend modes and stuff. That's fine. It's not complicated at all. If you can get there using white balance settings and then fussing with the tint and the color temperature, if you can get where you need to be that way, that's fine and dandy. And it's probably the easier way than fussing with it, especially if you're not inclined to go to Photoshop and fuss. No.
Okay, Joan.
Hi, everybody. That was one of the first things I noticed about this when I saw it on my computer was the skin tone or whatever. I thought it was, this was late afternoon. I thought it was the sun reflecting off the water onto the little boy. He was very tan. It was obvious he's outside a lot. But that was the one thing that bothered me. I actually lightened it up some from what it was. And I know that there's red in his face because if you zoom in, you can see that there's like almost a redness to one side of his face. So I'm definitely going to try that because that was the one thing that kind of, I really didn't think it was red. I would have said maybe orange or yellow, and I tried those and that didn't fix it. So I'm going to definitely try the red.
Okay, thank you.
Red is a quick judgment call. You're right. It could be orange. In other words, there could be a yellow complement there to the red, which would get you into that orange thought. But you can see it's difficult to make those kind of judgment calls exactly. And the reason for that is the subject matter of the picture just messes with your head. One of the ways to, if you're, are you working in Lightroom?
Yes.
All right, if anybody's working in Photoshop, I'll give you a little thought here. If you're working in Photoshop, you make a duplicate layer on this and go to blur and average, and the picture will have an overall color. And if you look at the color and analyze it by putting a probe on there and looking at the different colors, you can immediately see what the balance of colors is going to be, and it will help get you where you want to be. I did that and discovered that back here in the darker areas, and the darker areas have a tendency in most pictures to be a little bit more neutral. And in this case, the red was twice what the green and blue were. So that tells you right away that you've got a red issue to deal with. Now, if you're dealing with Lightroom, you can't do that. So you need to try to work with maybe analyzing this area and seeing if you could neutralize it, either using the white balance tool or by fussing with the color temperature and the tint sliders until you get something that looks better. You can see the red in the I would suggest that these pants are probably blue, and they're tending toward purple because of that red factor getting in there. And of course, like I said, it's sucking the color out of the blue over here. So there are ways to do it, but you just have to fuss. But at least you noticed it. Hot
Oh,
dog.
yeah. I think I can fix it now that know what the issue is. I wouldn't have picked the blue, red, and that's what it was. And I'm glad you said that because I like the picture. And
Yeah, well, it's a great picture. It's a
Yeah.
storytelling picture, and when you're shooting kids, that's as good as it gets. I like this a lot. It's very
yeah,
well done.
it was a very sweet moment. And and I'm so glad you told me that. I kept going back and forth whether it was the sun, the lateness of the day, the gold tones, but I didn't think so. So
Yeah. Okay, good.
thank you.
Okay,
Sure.
Joe and I could offer a suggestion in Lightroom Classic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go to the collar section, the collar tab, and
Mhm.
use the eyedropper on his cheek. When you use the eyedropper, it'll sample the color, and whether it's red or yellow or a combination, it'll pick up whatever tone that is. And then you
Ah,
can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders to affect that color.
okay.
I
That's a
think you'll
great,
find that to be effective.
right. And you're doing it on his cheek because that's where you're seeing most of the red, Dennis.
Yes.
That's where the sample would be, but that's gonna, unless you make a selection, it's gonna affect the whole picture.
True. Yep.
Correct. Okay. Thanks, guys.
But that might help the blue in the water too. Might bring the blue down.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is interesting, and it's a little difficult to understand. I blew it up to see what is going on back here, and I really haven't come to a good conclusion. So I'm going to have to, maker is going to have to tell me what I'm looking at. But with the kind of perspective and framing here, your eye tends to want to go right back here and see what's going on. There's a minor little point. I think there's a light line across the bottom here. I think I would just crop a tiny bit off in order to have that line disappear. This is possibly, and I wouldn't want to overdo this, but because of the depth of focus necessary to make this work for rounded background, I would try image stacking in spite of the motion. And I think you might be surprised at what you get as a result. Because if you shoot several images at different focal points in that image and then pick different ones and stack them together, you might get a very, very interesting result. And I would be interested in seeing what happened with that.
Okay, Vicky. Let's see, not sure if Vicky's on board. Let me check here. Oh, looks like she's not in the meeting, so that is Vicky Sanders. So thanks for your comments there, Bryson. Oh, you're muted, Bryson.
I do that. It's usually a good idea, but one of the other things that I did for fun when I was working was architecture, and I like the idea behind this. I like the overall composition, and it's a good place to start. I think I would do two things that would end up making this a very, very nice image. First of all, you've got a lot of dark down here that doesn't do any good. So, I would keep the windows that you can see information here because they kind of help to tell what's going on. But right about here, I would just crop everything from there on down out, not necessary to see it. And then I would use sky replacement, which would be a one-click piece of cake because of that bright white, and click and you have a new sky in there. And if you don't like it, pick a different sky, because anything that you put in there other than that white would be worth it and would make this into a really nice looking picture.
How do you feel about using Photoshop sky as compared to your own sky?
Well, if you look at my computer,
Thank you.
I've got a folder full of sky images, and I spend time photographing skies. The first thing I would say is your first inclination is to shoot sunsets. You have to remember that not all the pictures you're going to take are going to be good with a sunset sky. You need to shoot soft, fluffy clouds, and you need to shoot thin, streaky clouds and all kinds of different clouds at different times of day, so that you have a selection to pick from. I would do that rather than use a Photoshop sky. I mean, they're not there to be used. They're there to be used as examples, as the best way I think to put it. That.
All right, thank you. Okay. Oh, Mark, I guess it's time for your comments.
Yeah, Bryson, thanks for the comments. I really appreciate it. You've kind of confirmed my thought on the dark area needs to be kind of cropped out. Of course, this is heavily cropped as it is, so I'm going to have to go back and reshoot it when we get a decent sky too, because this was shot during the Carlisle trip last week, and the sky just wasn't right.
That happens.
So I made it all go away.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting building. It's how much, well, silly question. How close to accurate is the color of the building?
Pretty close.
Is that right?
Yeah. I
Good.
just changed the exposure a little bit. That's pretty much the colors.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the building, so I had to ask the question.
It's what it's known for.
Well,
Yeah.
that makes sense, doesn't it?
But it depends where you stand. It'll change.
Yeah, and it depends on the light. That light will change that building all day long. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Worth it. Very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
This is cool. I like this. Sometimes a centered composition is exactly what you need, and this works. I'm glad that the background has some tone to it. In other words, if this were just simply black back here, it would not have the same visual impact. The out of focus soft colors that surround the primrose are important and valuable in order to give you the overall impression of the picture. I think it's very, very well done, and I like it. So I don't have a lot of questions about it or comments to make other than that. It's good.
Okay, well, very good. Thanks, Bryson. That's mine. And it's a focus stacked image. I forget how many, but a macro shot, because this thing is very, very small, about the size of your thumbnail. And I focus stacked a whole bunch of images. So thank you. Oh, and I did manipulate the background to darken it, but intentionally leave some detail.
Right. Yeah. In other words, outside edges. Yes. Yeah. I was going to mention photo stacking, not knowing how big the subject was. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. I used to shoot things that were the size of your thumbnail for AMP. So that makes sense to me. Now that was back when I could close the camera down to f64, and get away with it, because
you and Ansel.
Yeah, film didn't have the restrictions that digital has in that respect. So, and the last one, chasing dolphins. I love this. I love a good abstract, and this is very, very good. If it's abstract and it's good, it's great. If it's abstract and it's not good, forget about it. There's no end to bad abstract images. So I really appreciate it when something like this comes together, and the title makes it even better. So it makes sense of the image. I like the subtle color differences. There's, it gets a little cooler and it gets a little warmer and a little bit more toward neutral. Of course, I'm suggesting that was the impetus for the title. I might be persuaded to reduce the impact of this bright area right up here, because my eye has a tendency to go right up there, especially with this leading line dragging me up there. But other than that, I would just leave this well enough alone. It's very, 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 very nicely done. And like I said, a good abstract is fine by me. Love them.
Very nice. Elaine?
Thank you, Bryson. This this was kind of an interesting photograph. It's not ICM. It's actually just a very fast photograph of a morning light dancing on moving water in my koi pond. I just happened to be sitting out there one morning, and the light caught my eye. And it's not a normal, abnormal scene. It's quite common for that, to see that flickering effect on the pond. But for some reason, it had a much different effect based on the angle of the light at that particular moment. And I had my 600 millimeter equivalent lens attached to my camera. So I just pointed and took a series of very fast shots, and this is what I got. I did vary the shutter speed throughout this whole session, as well as the aperture, to see what I would like best. And this was one of my favorites, and it does reflect that psychological phenomenon called pareidolia, where you see animal faces in inanimate objects. And for me, water does it. And I see more than one dolphin. The one you pointed out is actually kind of upside down in my view. But there are several other dolphins in this shot.
Now I see it. I didn't see it before. Now I do.
I can't explain why dolphins are in there. I do have large koi in the pond, but they weren't in this area that I was shooting. So it's intriguing to me, but I had fun doing it. And thank you for your suggestions. I will take
absolutely. Yeah, this is abstracts are lovely. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I would say that is also one of the things that I have the least amount of success with, just simply because you can shoot abstracts until the cows come home, and then come home and throw them all away because they just don't work. They have a tendency to either grab you or they just simply aren't there. And it's very easy to see once you get accustomed to looking for the way that the shapes and forms balance within the frame. So I commend you on the photo, and commend you on knowing to shoot and keep shooting. You know,
Well, I have to admit, I shot probably over 1,000 shots
not
in
not at
sequence.
all surprised.
In sequence, and there were probably 10 out of that that were even remotely interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Very good. Very, very nice.
Bryson, when you do abstracts, do you look for straight abstract images, or do you intentional camera movement, or what do you consider what's your abstract technique?
I don't do camera movement. I'm an old guy. I lock the thing on a tripod, and now anymore I could get away with handheld pictures. Let me stop sharing here once. And, now how do I close that? Okay, boom.
Yeah, we're good here.
Am I still here?
Oh, you are, but you stopped the screen sharing so we can see you.
Okay. All right. I just want to see if, but you don't see me, do you?
Yep, we do.
Okay. All right. Well, if you look at me, there's an abstract right above my head. That's one of my favorites. That hung in a show down in Columbia a couple of years ago, and I got a lot of very, very positive comments on that. One of the things I do is play with the crop tool, straighten the image, make it crooked, rotate it. This one's rotated, I think 90 degrees, or 90 degrees from the way it was shot. And then all of a sudden something started to happen. So it's definitely something that requires a lot of fuss, because you can't just, it's not like a landscape where you can analyze the corners and the edges and everything and take a picture, and then now all you have to worry about is the balancing the colors and the tones. It's a lot more complex than that. I can appreciate some of the things done with intentional camera movement, but I would say that that is another place where, just you're going to press the button down and hold it until the cows come home, because it's the failure rate is going to be extremely high. It just is. That's all there is to that. So
I mentioned on Facebook, for anyone who's interested in well done, beautiful ICM images, look up Roxanne Overton, Overton. Started following her, and just some intriguing images. Some are combined images in Photoshop. Other ones are straight, intentional camera movement. But there's enough detail there to grab your eye and make sense. But it's
you know where she's from?
no, I'm thinking Australia or New Zealand, but I'm not sure. I looked up her profile and she didn't have it listed, and I asked her to present at a camera club meeting via Zoom, but she declined, says she doesn't do that anymore.
I found somebody who's another female photographer from Scandinavia who are doing similar things that I thought were interesting, and I don't remember her name, unfortunately, but there are some people out there doing this. Anything that gets you to an image that makes you happy is fair game. That's the way I look at it. So
very good. Okay. Anyone have any questions or comments for Bryson or one of the presenters this evening, one of the photographers of the images that we showed? Just unmute yourself if you do. Okay.
Dennis, this is Joan.
Mhm.
I have a question on, I think it was on Richard's photo of that nighttime scene.
Mhm.
And I have I bracket quite a bit on my landscapes at times. And Bryson brought up the suggestion of knowing when to space your stops out versus, you know, a half a stop or two stops or, you know, whatever. How do you judge that by the contrast strictly, or so if there's a lot of contrast in the picture, you bracket your f-stop out a couple times, or
Well, here's my approach. You're shooting raw, right?
yes.
Raw files. So raw files have a fairly large, or a very large exposure latitude as compared to JPEG files. So generally speaking, my philosophy is I just do two stops all the time. Now that's not as, you know, as carefully done as Bryson considers probably, but that's my standard. If I'm going to do exposure bracketing, I just shoot raw and do two stop difference.
So regardless of the contrast,
Right,
that's
right.
what
Now,
you do.
Bryson, you want to
Okay.
counter
Because I've been doing one, you know, I usually do one. you
yeah,
know.
raw
half
file
a,
will allow you to, you know, do a little bit more.
yeah, a half a stop is not worth the effort. And in most cases, a stop isn't even worth it. I usually go at least a stop and a half, and I've gone as far as 3 stops, usually to manage highlights more than shadows. So you really have to determine. The reason you do this in the first place is because the dynamic range of the subject exceeds the ability of the camera to capture it, right? So what you're doing is you're taking a picture that favors the highlights, and in the process you're trashing the shadows. And then you take another picture that favors the shadows, and in the process you trash the highlights. And I've gotten away with 2 images in that regard. Some people say, well, I prefer to have that centered image there where everything is just fine except for the highlights and shadows, and then we'll bring them in as separate elements. That would give you a 3-image bracket, and that's nothing wrong with that as far as thinking is concerned. I did a lot of that with interior architecture, where you've got so much contrast in a room because the lights have a tendency to be too bright. The light falling off on a wall is going to be bright at the top and it's going to be dark at the bottom. So, you know, there's a lot of that kind of fussing around. But I would say, yeah, a stop is not quite enough. Stop and a half, 2 stops should get you there, especially with a raw file, because like you said, you've got that extra range of capability to deal with. One of the things you can do, if you wish, is shoot a picture with the assume you're probably changing the shutter speed so that your highlights are managed, brought down to the point where they're not clipping. As soon as you're there, then shoot one that is a normal exposure, shoot one so those highlights don't clip, and then shoot one so that the shadows don't clip. That sounds like an oversimplification, but it's actually pretty much the way it has to be. I think your 2-stop thing is not out of line from the standpoint that in almost 98% of the pictures you take, you're going to be good. You're going to be covered. I bet you rarely find that doesn't do the job.
Right. Well, the other part of my strategy is I vary the number of images. So if it's a very, very high contrast scene, I might go 5 images instead of 3, and that would cover a wider, you know, range. So it's really usually 3 shots, 2 stops apart, very high contrast scene, 5 shots, 2 stops apart.
Also not a bad idea, because you're going home with something you can use that beats the heck out of going home with a lost shot. So yeah, good.
Well, when you do that too, you can pick out the ones you want to use. You know, you can look at the 5 and say, okay, I like 1, 3, and 4. And
That's the whole idea.
okay,
Yep.
thanks. I didn't know if there was kind of like a general rule of thumb. Because I had never read about one or.
Well, my
or it-
philosophy is to try to keep it simple so I don't have to do too much thinking.
Exactly. Or as our speaker said, and Bryson agrees, it depends.
It depends, yes.
Yes,
Okay, other questions or comments?
and I don't believe in rules.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I said the same thing. No rules in photography. All right.
Hey, Bryson, Dave Marchetto, thanks again for all. And I heard you talking about diffraction. I have a two-part question while you're here. Number one, given that you're looking at an image, how do you know you're seeing diffraction? You know, what is it? And the second thing is, given a lens, given any lens that you're using, do you, this sounds maybe very naive, but do you want to avoid the smaller f-stops on the face of it, given that lens, to somehow eliminate this dreaded diffraction?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the only thing that smaller f-stops, f16, f22, the only thing that they do is rob sharpness. That's what diffraction does. It robs you of sharpness. That Cambridge in Color website that I mentioned has a diffraction limitation piece of software where you can dial in the you can dial in the camera, the focal length, how far you are from the subject, et cetera, and the aperture, and then click calculate, and it will actually show you a picture of what they call the airy disc. And that's funny. Airy should be capitalized because it's actually named after a person. Airy disc sounds like something that somebody made up, but it's actually the diffracted disc of light, and it shows you based on the pixel structure of your camera how big that disc is compared to the pixel. So if the disc is bigger than the pixel, you're going to get diffraction, and that diffraction is going to rob you of resolution. So is avoiding 16 and 22 a good idea? Absolutely. The only time I would think about using them is if you can only use one shot, and the only way you're going to get enough depth of field is to shoot at 22, and then just realize that you're going to not get the sharpest picture you're going to get at any other possible aperture, and then like focus stacking or something of that nature. Yeah. So.
Well, that's very helpful. And so here's the maybe the last question, and it's got to do with what I would have heard of the sweet spot of the lens. Is that given most lenses around f8? Would you buy into that?
Well, the problem we have in photography is we have too many cute phrases like sweet spot, that's going to change with the lens. It's going to change with the format. In other words, full frame, APS-C, 4/3. It's going to change with the lens design, because there are some lenses that do not perform well wide open. Let's say you've got a f1.4 lens, and at 1.4, you not only have extremely shallow depth of field, you may not have the sharpest image that lens is capable of producing. So you start to close down. You're going to discover that at f2, at f2.8, at f4, somewhere between 4 and 8, you're going to discover that lens is just performing as good as it can possibly be. So that would be the sweet area, if you will, not any particular aperture, but that would be the area of best sharpness for that particular lens. But there's a DxO website that where they just analyze the living dickens out of lenses, and they will tell you this lens performs best at this aperture, and then, you know, from here to there, et cetera. They just really take it apart. That may be more information than you really want. But there is some validity to the thinking, yes. Like I said before, if as long as the lens can perform well at any given aperture, I have a 4/3 camera. I can shoot that at 5/6 all day long and have short pictures and wonderful depth of field. I just don't need to use anything bigger or smaller than that in terms of aperture. When I worked with a full frame camera professionally, my lens choice, depending on the shooting I was doing, I would shoot between either at f8 or f11, depending on the subject matter. When I was working with interiors, I worked a lot at f11, but I never went past f11 because I knew I was going to start to lose resolution. So, you know, if that tells you anything, I don't know.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you so much for that insight, Bryson.
Sure enough.
I remember seeing a YouTube video a while back, and I think it was Steve Perry, the wildlife photographer, who did a video about diffraction, and he actually showed images where you could see the difference in the sharpness. And if I can find that, I'll send you a link to it, or included in the follow-up email tomorrow.
Super.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis.
About 8:30, so let's wrap things up here soon, guys. Anyone have any pressing comments or questions? All right. Bryson, want to thank you very much. Let's give Bryson a nice round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bryson.
Thanks, Bryson.
Appreciate it a lot, Bryson. Your comments are always very informative and worthwhile. So thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. The follow-up email will go out tomorrow with the link and some follow-up information. So,
Bye, everybody.
thank you and good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Night.
And